All right, welcome everyone. It is our privilege to be able to share some stories about the Hippodrome, or the story of the Hippodrome, with you tonight. And I'm excited to welcome you all on this warm, steamy, non-hockey feeling night. But thank you for coming. Being inside the Hippodrome right now sounds probably lovely compared to the heat and humidity out there, but we'll take it because it'll be cold again soon enough. So I am Sarah Hansen, the Executive Director here at the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society. Along with me tonight are Dan Jones, our Creative Director, and Meg Lesh, who's going to love me because I probably didn't tell her about that part, but our Administrative Assistant in the office. So we are thrilled to have both of them along for the ride. And we'll go ahead and jump in. So I want to start out by saying thank you to our members here at the Historical Society, because without our members, we would not be able to do the programs and offer the exhibits and all the different things that we do. So thank you for being a part of the organization and supporting us. And of course, we are talking about the Hippodrome because it turns 100 years old this year. It also is the theme for the Manitou Days Festival, which kicks off in just another week, I guess, a week from Thursday. Bears on Blades is the theme, so you'll have to watch for us in the parade. I will not be on blades. If anyone's ever seen that, it's not a good idea. But Sasha, the bear in the back there, will be all decked out for the parade with her black and orange, as well as I believe we are having skaters from the girls hockey program, White Bear hockey program, skating along with us in the rollerblading along with us in the parade. But so we're excited to kick that off as well. So let's go ahead and talk about the Hippodrome itself. So 100 years ago, or well, more than 100 years ago, actually, the county fair, the Ramsey County Fair, started out right here in White Bear, where the Hippodrome stands today. And its first showing was in August of 1913, which is interesting and kind of makes me laugh because they started planning for this in the spring, like April or May of 1913, and then officially kicked it off in August. And that just seems like a really common White Bear thing to, have something, but they did it really well. So it's impressive. So what they did for those, it was three days in the beginning in those early years, and then it expanded to 4 days. But of course, it was all about agriculture. It was about the livestock, about the farms, about the crops and the things, the gardens and crafts and all sorts of other things, and you can kind of see that there. They started by putting up a huge tent, a 100 by 200 foot tent, and having that be the centerpiece of the fair. The community was very excited, as you can see. White Bear, the center of the map next week. So the White Bear Press was sharing their enthusiasm for it, and truly am I being shown up by Georgie again?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. I forgot to introduce Georgie, our office dog, as well, but there you have it. So anyway, so one of the things that was going on in the community as a whole, the press pushed forward, and really all of the promoters of the fair, was brightening up, what they referred to as brightening up, because crowds were going to come visit our community, because it was a really big deal to be selected as the host to the county fair. Ramsey County, of course, has St. Paul, which could have easily been the location for the county fair. But the purpose very specifically was to pull it out of the city and have it in an more agricultural kind of area. And I know we don't think of ourselves that way today, but we certainly were. And so a lot of the folks on the board stepped up, a lot of folks in our community stepped up, including F.H. Murray, Fred Murray, who was many things in White Bear. He would go on to be mayor in the later years. He was also, a few years later, and he was also president or one of the co-founders of one of the banks in town, which you can hear about later on this summer when we do a program on the banking. But very active in many ways. In addition to Murray, who served as the vice president of the county board for the Agricultural Society, we had William Gall, who was a farmer on the south end of town in White Bear Township, F.F. Farrar, who was the superintendent of schools at the time, and J.H. Spink, who was a merchant, and then George H. Rife, who was the superintendent of Ramsey County schools, not White Bear schools, but Ramsey County schools. So a lot of movers and shakers, if you will, from the time. So what's interesting here, and just to give us an orientation, I think most of us probably have a familiarity with where the Hippodrome sits today. But what is very fascinating or very intriguing about that is, so this is 8th Street crossing the highway. The tracks are roughly, those are railroad tracks, but they are roughly where the Highway 61 runs today. So if you can envision the Hippodrome being where the star is there, it is literally on what would have been farmland. When the county fair started in that area, they would have, there was no high school building. Today, what is Central Middle School, the expanded portion, they're moving back into Central Middle School, more recently has been the district center, but was the original White Bear High School. If anybody's, they like to change names and purposes and move buildings around on me. But with all of that, so when that didn't happen until about 5 or 6 years after the fair started. So there really wasn't a lot going on in that vicinity at that point. At this point is what I'm trying to articulate. And then you can see here, this is a little bit an aerial photo that's blown up a bit, but you can see the school as we were just talking. So originally the high school down here. This is the Hippodrome. There's a track here that was one of the tracks for the fair, and we'll see that in some other photos and things as we go, but to give you kind of a sense, and then obviously the outgrowth of it, but it was really not incredibly built up at that point. Yeah. I give you data. That's 1936 area. Okay, that makes sense. So this photo comes from 1936, and that makes a lot of sense because if you look at the very bottom or the south end of the high school building, you can see the auditorium, which is today the community auditorium there, on the being probably not completed at that point. I think it was completed in 37, but down in that realm. So I do want to point out, and we're big on things, how things get named in this community. So the Hippodrome, I don't actually know. The Hippodrome is, there are a lot of hippodromes around the world. That's actually a thing for an ice arena or that sort of thing. I'm not exactly sure on the purpose of that. But I do find it interesting, and this is a complete side tangent, but when they opened the Ramsey County Fair in 1913, they, on August 28th, it started with a welcome from the St. Paul mayor, Herbert Keller. I discovered in digging around a little bit that Herbert Keller is the reason that we have Keller Golf Course down in Maplewood. So just kind of an interesting whatever tidbit. For that particular first session of the fair, we had over 800 people who attended and entered their livestock and crops for judging. Others came, of course, to see that and all of the equipment and machinery that they could help with their agricultural efforts as time went on. It was considered a success by all accounts, and folks were almost immediately, the organizers wanted to build on what they had and started planning for 1914. So things grew very quickly, and a few structures were added over time as the needs grew, I guess. One of the things that, in addition to, of course, the fairgrounds, which would be sitting right over here, that grew was the high school that I just mentioned. When it was originally built, it was the area between these two columns, and within just a couple of years, they had to add the wings on either side for classrooms because the population was growing, and the needs for more classrooms were high. So they did that fairly quickly, and they did that by 1924, 25. And at that point, in 1925, they decided to hold exhibits. So any sort of, if you brought the largest squash, or you wanted to present your, watermelons or whatever for judging, it was all done in what they referred to as the north wing, the new north wing of the high school in 1925. So you can see that there was a lot of collaboration between the fair, the county fair, and the school district, and I'm sure it didn't hurt that our superintendent was on the board, but it's still, they kind of tie together logically. So these buildings, at first glance, these buildings, and this isn't a great shot of them, but They aren't very exciting, but I think they're, as you look at them, there's a lot of thought put into them. If you look at it, so it's one long string, and they were the livestock sheds. So if you imagine the livestock barns at the state fair and that sort of thing, but they have the peak, and then this one's recessed, and then the next one has the peak and comes out, and then it's recessed again. And you have different, so I'm assuming that they had different types of animals, different types of livestock in each one as you go down. But that was something that happened fairly early on in the early 20s. And so between the exhibits and the amusement programs that they added at that point, they had quite an attraction going. So there's this gentleman named Robert Freeman was the secretary of the Ramsey County Agricultural Society. And in most of the newspaper accounts and things in the mid-20s, early to mid-20s, he's given an awful lot of credit for what was happening, all of the big ideas and pushing things forward and getting support. And if you can imagine at that, well, at any time really, for something like this, a county fair is a county fair, and of course the county backs it. There's the Agricultural Society, Ramsey County Agricultural Society, that steps forward, and the county backs it and supports it. But it takes, like anything else, a lot of individual community support. So whether that be volunteers, it be sponsorships, it be showing up and buying tickets and participating, all of the things. And Robert Freeman is pretty much unequivocally recognized as the person who really pushed things forward. So his passion was what got folks like the White Bear Association, which was the predecessor to the White Bear Chamber, got the White Bear Association to get behind it. I love the enthusiasm, and again, the White Bear Press was always good at those in charge of the White Bear Press were always good at pushing things forward. But the association made a formal statement that at one of their meetings that they were pledging support of the building program and general success of the fair. So they wanted, and this is leading up to the Hippodrome, there is a reason I'm talking about all of these things, as I shut off the mic. So they pledged support to the idea. I love this, the action of the businessmen of White Bear through the White Bear Association at their luncheon on Tuesday, wherein they unanimously decided to get behind the Ramsey County Agricultural Society in its work of constructing a big agricultural hall, and in assisting in every way possible in making the Ramsey County Fair a success is significant. So all of this is leading up to say that the Hippodrome, which we all know for skating, hockey, free skate, open skate, all of that, started out essentially with mostly vegetable exhibits inside of it. And I can only imagine if I were to tell the kids, my kids both played hockey there and learned to skate there. If I were to tell the kids, that's really what the purpose of the building was, they would laugh in my face, but it's the truth. So by March of 1926, the county fair building, they actually met. They had a meeting right next door at what is Kellerman's today, but was the village auditorium at the time. They had a luncheon and a meeting there, and then they went out and walked the grounds of the fair and selected the site. And the quote from the paper says, after canvassing the situation, it was unanimously decided to locate the agricultural hall in the southeast corner of the fairgrounds, near the driveway entrance to the school grounds. It was also decided to locate the grandstand on the south side of the athletic field, just west of the present grandstand, with its back to the school grounds. So they were definitely investing. They were definitely stepping up and improving things as time went on. And again, they moved along very quickly. So that was decided in March of 1926. By the time the fair opened that August, we had the Hippodrome in one form or another. Certainly not 100% finished, but it was pretty much. What I love, and you don't necessarily see in the same way today, but what I love are the windows, and you'll see this in a lot of the photos. It makes it a wonderful way to be able to identify interior photos if we're questioning whether or not it's if we're in the Hippodrome or not. You'll see what I'm talking about with the light shining through. And then, of course, you can see the livestock sheds that I was talking about before up in that area as well. So As you can guess, it was a big deal when they did this. And they opened the building. It officially opened on August 17th, 1926. They had a big ceremony to dedicate it. And I think it's interesting that 100 years later, we're sitting here tonight talking about it. But the erection of this building is one of the finest acquisitions to the city in its history. And the event is to be marked by a program on the above date. And the article went on with other descriptions and things, but it was a big to-do. And so that was August 5th. The next week in the paper, they had advertisements and more articles and news, just making sure that folks were aware. They always use the word commodious to talk about new buildings. I don't know why, but so the article here, a little snippet says, the acquisition of this attractive and commodious new building is deemed of such importance by the fair management that the directors plan formal dedicatory exercises at the fairgrounds Tuesday afternoon, August 17th. Now, of course, that was a good almost 10 days before, but as you can imagine, as you can see, in the ads there, the main exhibition hall, among other things, is highly touted as a reason to come, and filled with grains and grasses, fruits and flowers. Not a hockey stick to be seen, or a skate blade or anything else. So, but that's okay because it didn't take long. So, of course, why are we jumping ahead? Don't do that. There we go. Of course, it was accepted. It was a huge celebration, and folks were thrilled. And then, of course, they got into the antics of the upcoming fair the next week, and so things jumped right in, and people were happy. We always like to do little comparisons, and the fact that I don't know what the Ramsey County Fair is supposed to be back this year. It's been on hiatus for a few years, and I don't know what they're charging for admission or what they're charging for rides and things, but in 1926 you could get in for 25 cents. So I'm guessing that's not the case this year, but that's okay. This is the newspaper photo that it was part of the picture that was on the cover, or the picture at the beginning there, that isn't as easy to see here, but of course it's the folks, the grounds of the fairground and the hippodrome itself. I like that, again, White Bear, and this is the White Bear Press, so that's fair, but I like that they say things like, there are very few county fairs which boast of such an excellent main exhibits building, but there are many fairs in need of such accommodations and which are hoping to obtain them, because White Bear likes to do that stuff and be there and be early on and ahead of the game. So not a great picture, unfortunately very pixelated, but I included it because I want to point out the fact that all of this was going on during a time when automobiles weren't, typical. I mean, they certainly were out there, but weren't the common thing. I mean, we're still talking about horses and wagons and carriages and things, not just because they're at the county fairgrounds. This is 1926, because they're, that was what the common way around town. So you can see the ad again there and all the folks. If you zoom in on this picture, if you play around with it a little bit, this is actually the dedication, because you can see off on the side, and I think they'd probably be a little more cleaned up, but there's mud, and I mean the sod, the grass, the stuff is not in great shape in certain spots, and they're still working through it. But what I love about the actual building is the fact that they didn't just slap up another concrete building, another concrete structure. They took some care in this, and I think that's a huge part of the reason that it's stuck around, that 100 years later we're still talking about it. And there have been moments over its history that it almost didn't make it, but it doesn't show incredibly well here, but if you get close to it, there's an awful lot of detail throughout the structure, and even in the brickwork, even in the roof line there's a tremendous amount of care taken in the design and in all of the pieces. So if you look here, you can actually see the hippodrome there. Of course, the high school, the original portions of the high school building, and as I mentioned, the driveway that comes in. We've got the ring there where over the years a lot of different things happened, including bicycle races, horse races, some claim car races, but I think that would be challenging, but who knows? Stranger things have certainly happened. And all of this is kind of interesting. I mean, there's so much about this to look at. This is Central Avenue, the tiny little street that tucks in between Bloom, Division's up there, and Bald Eagle Avenue back here. I mean, a lot of this at this point is still mostly farmland or agricultural. If we got into our aerial photos as a whole, you'd see even more so how much of it has largely agricultural roots as you head out. But up here, this is the railroad water tower, which would have been right out at 4th and 61. And behind that, just to the sort of the center of the top, was one of the lumber yards and the downtown. I mean, it wasn't huge. It wasn't a particularly, we weren't a particularly large community at the time. So to invest in and pull this off was a big deal. So now we get to the Bears on Blades. The fairgrounds skating rink to open Tuesday the 21st, which would have been December 21st, right before Christmas. So we had it as an exhibition building for all of 4 months? Not quite 4 months before we turned it into a rink. And not surprised. It stayed both, to be fair. It remained as both, or it was used as both throughout the years. But I think it's interesting. Again, they're calling it commodious, but they initially wanted to do the rink, or they wanted to have it as a rink as well. They weren't entirely sure that would go through, but clearly it did. And I like the statement, a big time is anticipated at that first inaugural game. Hockey rink opens with merry crowd. The ice rink and agricultural hall, they're still calling it that, at the fairgrounds was opened with much life on Tuesday night. The ice was fine, the temperature good, lights were bright, and everything is as is to order. The hockey game between White Bear and the American Hoist and Derrick Company. Hi. Yeah, I see you, but not right now. Derrick Company of St. Paul resulted in a 4-1 victory for the Bears. They said it was a practice game, but it didn't look any different from any other game as far as we could see. After the game, those present who desired skated, and it was a merry crowd. The school band was on hand and furnished music for the occasion, adding much to the pleasure of the event. So a pretty big event, if you can imagine. And then it continued. I mean, just each week or so, they had another game with someone. At this point, we did not have a high school hockey team. We had a town team, which was not uncommon. Different companies would sponsor teams, in fact, you'll see in some of the photos, sometimes the members of the team were sponsored, different members of the same team were sponsored by different companies. So you'll see different names on their jerseys, which makes things, I can't imagine how much fun that made things, but hey, to each their own. The rink from the beginning was available to the public. That was the goal, one of the goals. So interestingly, public skating was 25 cents. And again, that was the admission to the entire fair. So certainly an opportunity, I guess, but something that people could actually take advantage of. Ed Amundsen will sharpen skates in the warming room. So I don't know how many of you remember the old, before the 1990s renovations and the upgrading of the Hippodrome, but how many of you remember the old pot-bellied stove and a few? Yeah. It's that was sort of a trial by fire in many ways for us as we were tying our skates. But anyway, so as you can see, they established a schedule. This was published in the paper pretty regularly to keep people on track, and folks were able to come out. Now, it's interesting. So before, we always had an interest in hockey as a community. Our roots run deep in that regard. And it's interesting to see a few of these pictures of folks, whether you be out on the lake or a pond, or there were outdoor rinks. There were regularly, from the 1880s on, there are records of supporting the community, the village of White Bear in particular, supporting outdoor rinks. So for example, this one sat just a couple blocks over there was one at Webster and there was one at Washington at different times, Washington School. And there was that in the early years before the schools even were in place, which would have been late 1880s, early 1890s, when the schools came to be. There was a rink on Clark Avenue for a while. So if you go down by the library and head toward the lake, the street was wide enough and they would do a rink out there for the public. So it's hard to say what they would do before that, but or what they, I mean, and of course they had the lake as an option as well. This one cracks me up, and I love this picture for a lot of reasons. So this was the town team. This was not a high school team. So these folks were typically probably just out of high school when they played on the town team. We had baseball teams. We had the hockey team, of course. But what I love about this is, and I can never remember his name offhand. I'd have to look. But the poor guy didn't get the memo to turn the bear the other way. Or he wanted to be different. You never know. Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. Maybe he's signaling something. I don't know. But either way, it's a great shot. Shush. They make fun of me because I have relatives in many of the photos we have. He's a distant cousin of my grandfather. Or not a distant cousin. He's a cousin of my grandfather, a distant cousin to me. But yes, shush, Dan. Stuart Marcoux. He went on to be a big in the sailing world, actually. So not his hockey prowess. He was on the football team too, but his hockey prowess was not so great. Yes. Oh. Yeah. Prior to hockey skates versus figure skating. Yeah. Yep. If you see. Well, and of course, I mean, we could probably spend the rest of our time here tonight picking apart the equipment or lack thereof. Regular gloves, so like we go out and shovel snow or whatever with. The other piece, and I'm yeah with the toe. I know that I've heard stories and not a chance. Just wait, there's some better photos that show that. Not a chance of helmets, but I know I've heard stories. I had two kids who played hockey. I know lots of folks who had kids who played hockey. Some of you are probably in the room here tonight. The equipment today is quite intense compared to what it was, of course, for all good reasons. I mean, lots of good reasons, safety being one of them. But what I find entertaining is that I know a certain community member who tells a story about getting $20 from the hockey coach, the high school hockey coach, and running up to the hardware store to buy a dozen sticks or however many, a handful of sticks, and bringing them back to the rink for the kids, for the players to have. It wasn't, you have to have your stick, the bend of the stick, for, committed to exactly. They were all wood. They weren't composite. They weren't, all the different things that have to go into that we believe have to go into them today. So it's always entertaining to hear the pieces of that. So here's another shot that gives you a sense of the size and volume of the fairgrounds. Now this is a little bit later, probably 30s, maybe early 40s, depending on the cars. I'd have to give a real good look, but you can see those livestock buildings. This is the roof, of course, of the hippodrome. What I think is intriguing about this is on the roof it says north with an arrow and White Bear. So they're helping the pilots, because at this point we've got airports taking shape around us, or flights happening around us. So kind of interesting. But and then of course the big track as it continues on around there, and there's some sort of an event happening over on the side there. I can't tell exactly what's going on, but yeah, and then the cornfield. You're right. Exactly. So again, it was not it's not like we were the big city by any means. And again, a little bit different view of the same kind of thing. But lots of activity. Look at all the trailers with the livestock loading in, and they must have been on the roof of the high school to take this picture, I would think. I don't know where else they would get up that high. So the fair continued to be a huge thing. This is from 1932, and you can see some of the photos here that were included. Everything from horse jumping to, of course, what we think of the fair today for the most part, with the Ferris wheels and the rides and the activities and the things going on. But certainly kids showing their animals and the produce thing, and they did get into a lot of craft kind of things. So like we see at the state fair with scrapbooking or painting or mosaics or different categories that you can enter items into, that was happening at the fair at the county level as well. So this is one of my favorites, the lake in front of the Hippodrome. This was during a 1930s, during a flood that took place. And what's interesting, again, is that you can see, obviously, the building behind. I don't remember for sure, but I think this is Pete Bacon. I was going to say, I knew there'd be people who could confirm that. But, canoeing down the way, if you will, or paddling his way through. But yeah, it's crazy. It looks like we have an Amundsen duck boat, very similar to that. But yeah, I don't know what possessed him to get out with that, but I suppose it worked. It's not super deep, as you can see at this point, so it's kind of intriguing. I mean, the cars, it's not super high, so I don't know how well he's how well he's paddling. But again, you can see the activity going on behind, so this must have been one heck of a fair. There weren't a lot of, that I could find, there weren't a lot of stories or accounts about it in particular in the paper, which was odd, actually. So, all right, as we flip along, this is the 40s or late 30s, early 40s, and there's a series of shots very similar to this. I chuckle a little bit again, going back to my experience as a hockey parent. I'm attesting this to being like, the hockey photos that you had to take for every kid for every season, every time, because there's a whole crew of them with the different players lined up out front and whatnot. Again, at least the goalie got pads on his shins anyway. Not much else, but as time went on, they did improve that, and the gloves are getting better, somewhat better. I don't know how usable they were, but we had very simplistic sweaters a lot of the time. These are different, sort of simple. These were their actual sweaters, but simple. No bears anymore on there. So one of the things that is kind of fun with this is Gordy Vadnais, our future fire chief, among some of the others. This is the 1945 high school team, and they were the first. So what's fun about this is that White Bear played, and I hate to even bring this up, but White Bear played in the very first hockey game. I know, Dan's laughing at me for this too. White Bear played in the very first state tournament game for the Minnesota High School Boys State Tournament. White Bear scored the very first goal in the Minnesota State High School Hockey Tournament, or State High School League Tournament. Unfortunately, White Bear has never been able to win said tournament, but we've been, I think we've been to the tournament now like 20 or 21 times. I've lost track, and we can never get past that. Shush, says the guy who went to Mariner for a hot minute. Or shush to the guy. There is, unfortunately, but it's still fun. Okay. Yes, sure. Anyway, all right. So some of these aren't in great focus, but they show some interesting things. And these are where we get into the really interesting photos on the inside. What I love is, of course, showing the trusses and those big windows. That was the light that you got. So they aren't so much like that anymore, but they certainly shared a lot of the, or allowed for a lot of light, natural light coming in. You'll notice, and today there are some bleachers back there, some small stands to sit, but you'll notice that there is no such thing. There is no netting or glass or any protection, and everyone is standing, of course, right at the boards there. So similar idea, but again, you can see the folks standing there. There were light bulbs inside, of course, because they had night games and things, but certainly the windows did help in many, many ways. So I don't know what's going on here. So I certainly can't answer that. But again, if we would look at how the equipment is starting to change over time, again, the gloves are starting to take shape. The socks, apparently we don't care about matching or looking like a team. The breezers, or whatever we want to call them, apparently don't matter. I love the fact of all the guys, many of whom are wearing their jackets and ties and whatever, coming from work or wherever they came from, but all the folks standing behind the team in the photo back there. I don't know if they were supporters or what the, like sponsors or whatever, but it's kind of interesting when you look at all of them lined up back there. So this reminds me of the Mighty Ducks, I'm not going to lie, just with sort of the motley crew of folks piled in here. But many of you probably knew Jack Vadnais, so another Vadnais, one of the Vadnais brothers, showing there. Again, this is not a Bears team specifically at this point, but they are wearing central cartage for most of them. But the White Elephant nightclub in West St. Paul, not sure what's going on there, but he jumped in, of course. What's that? No, that's just a sponsor. The Central Cartage was a trucking company that sponsored the team at that point. So here comes some interesting ones. So all of these photos that you're going to see, or the next batch of photos you're going to see, actually came from Gordy Vadnais and his family. And I find it entertaining because for many, many reasons, as you look at some of the details. But one of my thoughts is, I know they didn't have Zambonis, but I'm not sure there was an advantage to playing inside other than maybe a windbreak. Because if you look at that ice, it's kind of a hot mess, but they managed to pull it off over time. They actually had helmets for at least some of them, the trainer in particular, trainer, but certainly had the helmets going on in that. There's this one. Somebody went into the boards, but I was telling folks earlier, I was talking with a few folks, just looking at the difference in the net itself, whatever, that's fine. It certainly doesn't look very forgiving if you were to run into it. Let's just put it that way. Not that any of them really are, but I would not want to be this person. I don't care. Was it? Yeah, right. I was under no circumstances. I mean, I've actually been the goal judge in youth hockey behind the glass with a light, but not on the ice with, and again, I realize that the goalies didn't have masks or anything on, but
he also doesn't have skates.
Right, there's a lot of things he doesn't have, and in sense is probably part of it too. I have no idea who this person is, and I feel for them deeply, and there are a few examples of them, but again, it's fun to see. I mean, look at all the faces, just like you see today on a Wild game or whatever. Clearly, someone had just scored or something was going on because they're excited about whatever's happening back there. Again, you can see it does not look like the most. Yeah, right. I don't know what they did. Now it looks like they actually, it's probably a player, but it would be my guess, someone who got benched or something, I don't know. But they're stuck back there. You can see, I think that's First State Bank, White Bear Lumber and Coal. They all have different things on. White Bear Motor Sales, they're all sponsored by different companies. And again, the gear is not huge. Does anybody remember, and I realize that this is before these particular photos are probably too early for most of us around today, but does anybody remember what the numbering on the areas is? I can't believe they had assigned sections when you bought a ticket. I'm assuming it's in order to remember where to put the boards, like if they fit, because they're probably not uniform. But yeah, just kind of curious from that standpoint. Again, poor guy. A different guy, it looks like, but poor guy. And I don't know, but I don't know. I cringe watching the kids play today, and I can't imagine being a parent then, but at least he got to call a goal or got to, signal a goal. Not a big crowd in this particular shot, but again, being able to look at the lights are actually on, but being able to look at the windows and the way the ceiling is. If you go into the Hippodrome today, obviously there's glass along the boards. Things are much more modernized, if you will. All of this still exists if you look behind the glass. If you look, if you wander around in the building, I mean, you can still see the hints of some of these things, and it's kind of fun to be able to pick that out. Again, I'm not sure what this picture is. This is Gordy Vadnais again, and he went on to play it with lots of different teams. He played, for many, many years with lots of different teams. But this is clearly the Hippodrome. Everyone, for whatever reason, posed in front of that end of the building. This guy at least had a hat. Not that it's going to help him any, but he had the sense to put on a hat. But yeah, same kind of thing. True, it's because they didn't have the flex and the sticks. The comment was the shots weren't 90 miles an hour. I'm not sure I care. I don't think I'd want a puck flying at me without anything, but again, some fabulous pictures. Yeah, aren't they? The nets are weird. They almost look like, yeah, I think if I had to bet, the sign there says Universal Fence Company. If I had to bet, I would say that there's probably a Peltier or an Auger or somebody involved in soldering or putting together those pipes and then covering them with fencing and having the sponsor be on there. So, Vadnais Oils is a sponsor on the back that you can read on that one. But again, making their way around. 617, yep. Everybody got involved. So. All right. So as the time went on, as the years, so that was into the 40s and early 50s, or 40s and 50s for sure. And as of course, we continue to skate at the Hippodrome, or continue to skate today at the Hippodrome. But as time went on, the fair disappeared or moved, I should say disappeared. They moved to Maplewood because, number one, the fair was facing financial challenges at the end of the 1953 season, and the school needed to expand. So by 1955, they had put this extension on the high school. Before they built the big round school. And but the Hippodrome stayed. They never let go of that. The rest of it started to fade, and so the school district ended up buying it when they expanded. They bought the fair. The count actually in the early years, or not the early years, the Agricultural Association had it for a fairly long time, but then they actually transferred it to the county because the Agricultural Society had financial, it was a challenging thing to keep it afloat, if you will, just based on an event. And so the county owned it for quite a while, and then eventually, in 1953, they sold it to the school district, who wanted the land at that point. Here's one of my favorites. Ice castles, of course. Portions of ice castles was what? Ice Castles, the movie in the 1970s was filmed. Portions of it were filmed in the Hippodrome. Very lovely. But what I find fascinating, and this is when I would have been skating, and they're around that same time period, so some of my memories as a kid in the late 70s, early 80s, but the boards, not that different. Pretty much very similar things to the structure as far as the structure goes. And so there had been movements over time. Of course, it was always a question: do we keep this? Do we want to continue on? Do we want to continue the building? And there was a period of time, probably there are a couple periods of time, but probably in the 60s, early 70s, when land was at a premium around the schools. We needed more space for the classrooms. We needed more school stuff, other things. We needed, of course, the sheet of ice is not big. I mean, it's not the same. It's not the ice that we use for high school games or whatever today. And so it had challenges from that standpoint. But there were I need to give credit to a couple of champions for the building. Uh, One, the earlier one, in addition to those who had got it built to begin with in 1926. But one significant one was Fred Espy, who was part of the recreation department, community education department. Without him, the building wouldn't be there today. That was really during the whole, we need new, we need fresh, we need whatever. He fought for this building and was able to influence enough folks into keeping it. Which is exactly why the Espy family in general or overall is representing. But Fred and Jerry, his wife Jerry, are the grand marshals for this year's Manitou Days parade. So posthumously, they've both passed away, unfortunately. So that's why the kids and grandkids are getting involved to help make sure they are remembered. But with the Hippodrome theme, it was appropriate to have them be part of that. The other person who kind of again stepped in more recent years is John Anderson, who is now more recently retired from the school district, but held a very similar role as Fred. He, in the 1990s, the building was renovated and updated, so they actually put in and heaven forbid, they actually put in an ice system, a refrigeration system, and they added a Zamboni, which was something that was not common. For those who skated up to that point to 91, 92-ish, when they did that, it was all shoveling. It was, you got done on the ice and you had to shovel before the next. So I mock the ice, the condition of the ice, but I get it. It is what it is. I will tell you that at least my kids are in their early 20s now, but when they were skating there 10 years ago or so, the Zamboni was only used every other ice hour. You had to shovel in between. But I will also tell you that 9 times out of 10, it was the coaches, not the kids, shoveling, which was like, wait a minute, this is where you're missing the point. I love the tradition, but you're missing the point. So anyway, so again, we see the Hippodrome down here. This is, of course, the original high school building and community auditorium, and the expansion, which all of this now is Central Middle School. Of course, looks different. This was taken just a few years ago, but it looks very different today with the changes to the fields and the high school addition and all the stuff that's gone on over here. There's Lincoln in the background. Yeah, it gets a little confusing when you look at all of it. But what I think is fantastic, and I chuckle a little bit because there was a comment made several years ago now when they were anticipating the new high school, the one that just opened, and all the changes to the different buildings. They were exploring their options, and there was a school board meeting where it was tossed out somewhere somehow, and I don't remember all of the details, but that, well, we could take down this building and we could take down the Hippodrome and we could do this and we could do that and turn it into a, whatever. We could, yeah. My phone, I had to laugh because I had no idea that the school board was talking about this the night before. But the next morning, my phone blew up. I got about 6 texts in a matter of about 2 minutes. I got phone calls like crazy, and people were screaming. I'm like, I didn't do anything. What happened? There was sheer panic that people that the district was going to do that. So I sent an email right away to Dr. Kazmerchuk, and it was hilarious because he said, "Why don't you come on over and we can chat?" You don't want to get called to the superintendent's office, even as an adult. So I did, and it was hilarious because I sat down with Tim Wald, who is the assistant superintendent, and then Dr. K, and they said, yes, someone, and again, I don't remember the details exactly who said it or what it was said, but somewhere along in the meeting, it was talked about, and he said, we're not crazy. We know this won't fly. You could have told me that on the phone, but they talked about it, and it was kind of entertaining because he said, "There's no way, we know that we will never get any sort of support for this project if we were to do that." But what I love about this picture, this is again a few years old, but not incredibly old. The signs have changed a little bit, but otherwise, they've done a fantastic job. This building is not listed in the National Register. There's no local landmark status that we have here in this community. They don't want to list it, and I understand, because they're doing what they need to do, and that's fine. But there's a lot of concerns about public buildings being in the National Register and whatever that people get wiggy about. Regardless, they are preserving the building as the district being the owners. They are preserving the building, and if you look at this and you compare it to those older photos, it really is kind of fascinating, the amount of detail. So I encourage all of you to drive by there, walk by there, take a look. But everything from the patterns and the brick to the carvings and things, and even the tile along these areas, it's pretty fascinating when you see it, and the fact that it's lasted a century. It's a very different setting for it today with all the school facilities and things around it than there was 100 years ago. But she's standing the test of time. So that's the end of the official portion of the program, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to